Yeah, gotta aim for the top like, hold up. Yeah, I can never doubt myself, I know better. All of you critics be acting like you know better. Blowing the smoke, but I know when the dust settles that I'm in my element. It's evident that there's levels to the game.
So, what's happening, people? Welcome back to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. On today's episode, CEO and co founder Reed Meyer sits down with Eric Rath of Rath Tutoring, and Eric gives a peek behind the curtain of how he works with students, as well as prepping for a test from an athlete lens. So, I hope you guys enjoy today's conversation between Eric and Reed. And as always, we appreciate you listening and watching the Athletes to Athletes podcast.
Eric, I appreciate you joining me today, man. I'm excited to chat with you a little bit more. For those that are just joining us here, we have Eric Rath from Rath Tutoring. So as you can imagine, the name speaks for itself. Eric, you and I have known each other for a few years now. We met at a conference and have always kind of kept in touch. And I think a lot of that has to do with, your connection to sport and obviously what you do in the industry as far as, test prep and tutoring is concerned. So just to kind of give that context a little bit, tell us a little bit about kind of you, Rath Tutoring, and sort of your relationship to sport.
Yeah, in short, I've been an athlete my whole life. I grew up in Southern California. Of course, like baseball, basketball. Even I remember in elementary school, I was on a school bowling team, of all things. And even
Nice.
kind of classically skateboarding, surfing. When high school came around, I was on my high school swim and water polo teams, but that was really just cross training for surfing. Like surfing's been the main thing always. But even in college, I was on the club sailing team up at Berkeley. And even today, I still surf. I still get in the pool and swim, still doing weight training for cross training. And it's because it supplements every other part of your life. It's something that I don't think students should just think, I just needed to get into college or I'm only going to play so long. I think everyone should be really a lifelong athlete and also not be afraid to mix it up. I switched from, things as intense as swimming and water polo or sailing, and then I would do yoga for like a decade, sort of thing. And it might not be as much of a competitive sport, but it's still bodily, it's still, improving, just expanding your kind of physical horizons and abilities. And to parlay that into test prep, I've been tutoring and doing test prep for 20 years now. So really longer than most of your students would be alive or the athletes would have been alive. And I bring that same sort of competitive mentality to tutoring and test prep because I think the way it's marketed is that, you're just some brainiac or you have some inherent talent when really it's a method. It's a process. And that's why athletes are truly my favorite students to tutor. And just in the company, they by far have the best score increases because they know how to get coached. They know how to respond to not criticism in like a mean sense, but like critical analysis, right? And so that's why whenever I have an opportunity to connect with someone that is in athletics as well as tutoring, test prep, college admissions, it really stands out. And I think that goes to show like why we've connected and stayed in touch for as long as we have. And yeah, I just love to share some insights with the athletes, their parents, and really more than anything else, leave them with a pathway to feeling empowered to achieve what they want to achieve. And really clarifying like all these like kind of there's a lot of fear-based marketing in the industry. And so I don't want them to be anxious. I don't want them to be worried and like rushing for things. Whatever they can do, like whatever they need to achieve is pretty much achievable within an extent. Like even bowling a perfect game is hard, right? Like even like I'm trying to think a hole in one is really hard in golf, but it can be done. And it just depends sometimes on your starting point, your timeline more so, and how much work you're willing to put in.
Yeah, I think it's actually a perfect segue. And before we jump into that, I will have to say I'm jealous of your versatility on the sports side. I became very pointy very early. I was one of those
Yeah.
kids. I was part of that generation. And yeah, just hearing the number of sports that you were a part of makes me wish I would have taken more advantage of so many things when I was in college and it was available.
Yeah.
My body wasn't going to break as easily. So that, yeah, that's awesome. I need to get more into that stuff. But to the point that you were saying, I think there is definitely a I don't know, an aura around testing in the
Mhm.
testing world, I would say right now.
Yeah.
And I do think to your point, I mean, I know at least on my end with a lot of the athletes that I talk about, there's this prescribed bucket that they put themselves in, where it's like, well, I'm not a brainiac. I'm not going to go for that 1600. I'm not going to go for that perfect score. So I'll just take it and I'll, whatever, it's over here and there's test optional and who cares and whatever else. So for you on your end, how would you kind of approach that conversation with an athlete and say, how do you motivate them to understand that there is value in having this test and having the score behind it rather than just taking it to take it per se?
Well, I think actually they should start by just taking it to take it. Like, and I mean that in a sense of like a practice test. Know where you stand.
Mhm.
You know, maybe it doesn't work out where you end up taking an official one because it's test optional. Maybe a coach is, giving you, helping you with admissions and you don't even need it. Those are realities. So I don't want to say on a blanket statement that everyone must take it. That's not the
Mhm.
case. But I think everyone should know where they stand. And that's why, whether it's with our company, Rath Tutoring, or, there's thousands of other companies out there and ways to take a practice test, but just take a practice test. Um, because then it's almost like having a baseline on if you're like at the combine or something and they're seeing like what your vertical is or what your 40 time is. At least we know like what your baseline is and what we could build off of too. And we can start to identify points that their lateral movement isn't as good as it should be. And so then you can implement sort of strategies to improve that. And also with testing, I think the reason there's that sort of hesitation is, well, athletes don't like to fail at things and they don't like to like not feel like they're the best at something even. And there's like that competitive nature, but these tests are designed to make you feel like it's your fault, to make you feel like you're the one who's not getting it or like you're incapable, but it's actually the structure of the test. And so when students come in and they're like, well, I'm not a good test taker, I'm like, right, like I don't speak Chinese, like I've never had any practice with it, right? And if you've never had any practice or exposure about how to go about this or develop a fluency like a language or playing a sport, of course you're not going to be that great at it. But it also doesn't take nearly as much time as like learning a language or a new sport. I mean, most students, especially if you have like a one-on-one tutor, it's going to range anywhere from about, let's say, once or twice a week for like 1 month to maybe 3 months, and you're
Mhm.
done. Because there's just a point of diminishing returns. It's like there's only so many things that are tested and in so many ways. So it just over time, you just learn every little aspect of it, like every rule and regulation, if you will. Um, but no, I think also by having a practice test in hand, especially when you're working with us, what we do is we have students take a practice test or they come in with a baseline score, and then they have a consultation with one of our directors of tutoring. And really, that's before they've ever paid for anything. And
Mhm.
the reason is that we don't want them to just blindly sign up for a program. They might not need that much. They might need way more than they think they need as well, right? So we want to be realistic with like what this is going to look like. And even if it's only once or twice a week, that's still a couple hours, between a tutoring session and homework. Athletes are already busy. They're already physically exhausted. They already have social lives and other academics going on. So truly like the worst case scenario is that we have a student or a family that just signs up and never really truly commits to the prep because they're burned
Mhm.
out. They don't have time. So we want to take that like kind of holistic approach where it's not just, their timeline and their goal score and their baseline score and availability, but does it all make sense? Is it all worth it? But you won't
Mhm.
know that until you have a baseline score in hand. And I will say though, the earlier you start, the better. Um, because, if you're even like this time of year heading into the fall and you're a senior, look, we can still help, but it's almost, I always like to compare it to, trying to like get in shape for a marathon like 3 weeks out. Like, yeah, okay, you might be able to struggle through and make it, but it's better to start a few months out, if not longer.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. And that's again, it's a great, kind of two really good questions that sort of came up as you were chatting. Let's go with the timeline one here right now. I
Hmm.
think everyone probably has their own definition of what that timeline looks like or their own perception of what that timeline might look like based on what their friends have done or based on what their siblings did or whatever it might be. So for really any kids in general, I mean, I'm working with student athletes and that's a lot of what we're kind of centered around, but really any kids, like what as a test aficionado, what would be
Yeah.
your ideal scenario? When would you love to have a kid show up and sort of go through this timeline effectively from a tutoring to a test taking
Yeah.
standpoint?
I think ideally taking that baseline test, let's say before July 4th, going into your junior year.
Hmm.
So let's say, especially if you've got some advanced math classes under your belt, because that's really the only subject matter that might have a student want to hold off for a minute. The grammar and the writing, the reading, all of that, any sophomore could do that really. But sometimes, if students have a time with math, it might be a little better to wait until, sophomore year is totally done, or even the beginning of junior year. It's kind of first semester. But the reason is too, is that as long as we have a baseline score in hand, let's say by around July 4th, so that's like, let's say you're done with your sophomore year, you have a little bit of time off, get that practice test done, or just earlier in the, let's say, spring semester of your sophomore year.
Hmm.
And that's also like by far the earliest I would do. Even my daughter who's in college over at UCLA now, she was a swimmer growing up. And, we'd be at these swim meets and she was in like sixth, seventh grade. And I'd see these parents having their kids do like problem sets for the SAT or ACT. And I'm looking at them like, you don't understand. I have multiple perfect scores. I've been doing this for over a decade. You don't start so early. Like these aren't rote memorization tests anymore. It's much more
Hmm.
like logic based as you approach it. So sure, if you want to get it off your back and you are a fairly advanced students academically, maybe a little earlier in your sophomore year, but truly there's no need before the spring of your sophomore year. Like that's really the
Hmm.
earliest. But even then, as long as you get it done by the end of your junior year, like that first test, or
Hmm.
sorry, that first baseline practice test, you're fine. You're going to have plenty of time because I'm actually not using admissions deadlines. I'm using more early decision deadlines in my mind
Hmm.
when I want you to have it completely done. And also, the benefit of going earlier is, a lot of coaches have certain slots on, this student has this type of academic profile, and the more that they can hone in on what you already have in hand, what grades you already have, what test scores you already have, the more they can kind of slot you in to, their greater admissions picture. I know that it's way more nuanced than that. I'm only on the tutoring side, so I can't speak to the admissions, but roughly speaking. Um, but I think also by finishing roughly, let's say by the end of your sophomore year, that gives you a full like roughly 18 months,
Hmm.
like none of this, like even for our students that could pour in as much effort as possible, it wouldn't ever take more than, like I mentioned earlier, 1 to 3 months for that first official exam. Then you pause, you get the scores back, you reassess, and also take into account, like, do you have an upcoming season, right? So, like, for example, we were working with a friend's daughter just this last year, and she put in a ton of time over last summer, but then she's an ice hockey player. So, the fall
Hmm.
and winter were just slammed. There was no way. But that's another aspect of test prep and these types of tests is that it's like kind of like riding a bike. The tests
Hmm.
don't change, and even when they do, it's announced like years out. So it's not like you're gonna do a bunch of prep this summer, go into, let's say, your football season or your water polo season, and then come back in the spring and try to take it again, and it's all different. No,
Hmm.
it's just the same. Like you're allowed to pause. Um, but even then, I think so many students too will start to like just take test after test, whether it's practice or official tests. And that's kind of like, running the same marathon, swimming the same race, but not reviewing the film. You're
Hmm.
not going to make progress just by running the marathon. So it's more truly about reviewing all of the, how you did, what went wrong. And I mean, we go into the most minute detail of like, you know, did you misunderstand the question? Was it something that you calculated? Did you answer it right? And just bubble something in wrong? Like, did you just make a
Hmm.
human error? Like, kind of like J.R. Smith calling a timeout in the finals with LeBron that one. I don't know if the students will remember that. But there are times where even the best of the best make mental errors in that way. Um, and so what's nice though too is that with that review and giving yourself more time, you have this sense of ease and the sense of clarity that allows for the highest levels of performance.
Hmm.
Because what really kills performance is stress and anxiety. They can be motivating sometimes, in small doses. But if you have this overarching amount of stress and pressure, it's just going to sink your scores, sink your grades. Um, so in short, I would say the the ideal situation I have for any student, take your first practice test before roughly the end of your sophomore year, maybe by July 4th of that year. Then that allows us to build a plan based on your sports schedule, your seasons, when coaches want you to have them. And more than anything else, it gives us a backup of this summertime from from your junior year to your senior year.
Mm.
And then in like the very last like emergency backup of the first fall semester of your senior year.
I love it. Yeah, and I think exactly to your point, just knowing what those guardrails are, I think could be so beneficial for folks because
Mhm.
we see it on the athletic side too, right? You have families that they're doing it out of love, but they're sending their kids off to like these week-long boot camps as
Right.
eighth graders and seventh graders, and like from my end, all I'm seeing is like, oh, your kid's gonna burn out by sophomore year. Like you're
Yeah.
gonna think you want me now, and then in a couple of years, they're gonna be so beat down by the fact that they've just done this one thing forever that it can't.
Yeah.
It's starting to have an adverse effect, right? So knowing kind of when that window is super helpful. And exactly to your point, I think a lot of people forget that, from an admission standpoint, right? You look at the regular decision deadline, and that's in January usually, but we're
Hmm.
all shooting for early action, early decision to give ourselves the most chance for admission and merit aid. And so now you've backed that up 3 or 4 months. Now it's October.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
to your point on athletes, if you're having conversations with coaches, they want to see scores if that's going to be considered. So that's going to be over the summer. So you slowly start to sort of cut into these different elements of the year that you might think you have.
Hmm.
But knowing kind of when that start point is and being able to sort of backtrack, taking your sport into consideration, I think is a really good plan. And just like anything else, if you're proactive and you have a strategy going in, it can be incredibly manageable to your point on, 1 month to 3 months of kind of dedicated test prep. If you do it the right way, it doesn't have to be this sort of fire drill that a lot of people feel like they sort of
Yeah.
fall into on this stuff,
Yeah.
which is just a nature of human experience a lot of times for
Yeah.
folks. They don't think about it because that's later. That's for college admissions. I'll deal with that when I
Right.
get closer to that. And closer to that comes real fast for a lot of people
Yes.
sometimes. So I
Yeah.
love having that as a baseline. Two quick questions for you. One
Sure.
quick question and then one question I want to dive into. So when you were talking about, you said on the test prep sides of things for timeline, the only thing you may want to take in consideration is a little bit more advanced math. What is your definition of
Great
advanced
question.
math for testing?
Generally, you're going to be able to make it through almost the entire test by completing Algebra 2
Hmm.
as like a threshold. It does both tests venture a little bit into like what the different schools would call either trigonometry or like early pre-calculus, but I'm
Hmm.
talking like the first 2 or 3 months of that school year. It's not like you're going
Okay.
into a lot of depth. Usually, those are more kind of like, let's say even something as simple as like sine, cosine, and tangent. You're not doing these like massive calculations. They just are more testing like what they are. So it's not going to be it's really not actually like a math test. It's more of a like attention and focus and being detail oriented within math.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, gotcha. That's good to know. And that actually parlays really well into my next question, which is I even remember this from my test prep. I think this is I'd like to get your take on it as somebody who's in the thick
Hmm.
of it. You know, I think it's easy for a lot of people to think, you mentioned kind of the popular adage of like, oh, I'm just not good at test taking. And I think there are people that
Hmm.
sort of take this interpretation of like, well, I'm just not very smart, or I'm not as smart as this kid, so I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to take this test very well. And I remember being told when I went to my test prep was that it's less about what you know and how you prepare. It's less about being able to just have a baseline knowledge for these things and more so being able to sort of how do you interpret the question? How do you understand the way the test works? I'd like to get your take now in 2025 as opposed to 2011 on kind of
Hmm.
what your thoughts are on how much of it is, just your base, we'll call it just intelligence and your ability to do the test and your ability to
Yeah.
sort of train yourself to what that test is asking you to do. Because I think that a lot of times is sometimes something that keeps people from doing tutoring because they think, oh, well, I'm here on my math, so tutoring is going to get me here. But if tutoring can help you learn the test, like that's to
Hmm.
me where I think the disconnect might exist for some people.
Yeah. Yeah. Great question. And I think the way I'd start to shape it is we very rarely have to spend that much time on the core content of the
Mm,
test. It's almost all on the structure, on the approach, on time management, on efficiency, because I mean, the basic grammar, students pretty much know. Most of them grew up speaking English, if not, born and raised in an English speaking country. Uh, their reading skills are fine. Their math is probably good enough, even if it's not like over the top perfect and they're not in some advanced calculus or stats course. Um, so even when we have to deal with some content, that it doesn't make up that much of the test, or sorry, that much of the test prep. Maybe a third of our time is spent on that. But instead, to your point, it's more about learning the structure of it. And what I'll compare it to is this. I use this one all the time with athletes. Think of like the SAT or the ACT as an American Ninja Warrior course. Like, these like obstacle courses, right? That we've kind of seen
Yeah.
variations of. And the reason I mention that is that let's say you have, like someone like LeBron try to do that. One of the strongest, most able-bodied athletes in the world, but he might fail because he doesn't know how to get around that obstacle. Like he might be the one to fall in the water. Then you could have like, a 5-foot gymnast who does it perfectly because it matches their existing skill set. And then you could have someone that's like, an Olympic high jumper and they fail as well because they don't have the upper body strength to go through this one obstacle thing. And so kind of my bigger point is that it's not as much about whether you're strong or in what form you're strong, like kind of your existing skill set academically or mentally. It's more, do you know how to go about the obstacle course? Right? It's like, can we parlay that into, do you know how to navigate this course as it's laid out? And so that knowledge, though, of knowing how to go about it far outweighs your base strength, in the sense that, like, if we could take it one step further with like this obstacle course that someone's completing, like your Joe Schmo could beat out like some Olympic level athlete if they know how to run the course correctly.
Yeah. Oh, I'm stealing that. I like that a
Yeah,
lot.
please go for it.
Yeah, that's a really, really good way to kind of visualize that and see, okay, yeah, that's awesome. That puts it in a really good perspective. And yeah, I like that. Okay, cool. I have no
And
follow-up. I just am enjoying that.
yeah. But one other thing I'd say on that is that the course is designed to make you think, and whether it's like an obstacle course or a admissions test, they're designed to make you think that it's your fault, like you're not strong enough. And it's like,
Mm,
no, you just didn't know you had to grip it like one hand forward, one hand backward, and then do a little hop thing or whatever the things are that they do on those. Or like, when you transition from ring to ring, there's all those little things that they do on those. But yeah, it's more about form and technique than raw power or like repetition.
mm. Yeah, I think that's huge. And I think that's the piece that I spend so much time trying to get across to my kids, where it's like, man, you can struggle in math, you can do these things, but that should not dissuade you from having this other piece to be able to bring to the
Hmm.
table on an admissions side. And I think that kind of lays into sort of the final kind of key thing I wanted to chat about, which was obviously test optional admissions has become more and more popular post COVID. I think a lot of schools
Hmm.
decide, they weren't having it. They realized they wanted to keep it. There's a litany of sort of rationales and reasons why that is going. I'm not saying it's good or bad for one reason or another. I think more access is awesome. But I do think that having an extra sort of tool in your toolbox is something that really comes into place. And so on your end, and this is more just curiosity from somebody who's on the consulting side, I don't necessarily have as many of these conversations. A lot of these schools are test optional. What have you found? Are there any trends or any things that's different as far as who you're working with and what the interest is in sort of the public sphere for testing?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a varied and tough question because if you ask me personally, I don't agree with the tests. I really don't think they have value. I think they're kind of these manufactured thresholds in the same way that that example I just used, like American Ninja Warrior or any other assessment, like, is a 40-yard dash really that relevant in football? Maybe, but should we really base like draft decisions off of this one metric? And should we really base admissions decisions off of like 2.5 hours on one test compared to like 4 years of academics or all these other things? I'd argue against it, but it's the world we live in. A lot of times I
Hmm.
compare it to, we all see there's biases and things in like the legal system. And if you think of me as a lawyer instead of a tutor, I know that, but it's a bigger problem than I can change. So I'm going to help my
Hmm.
clients in the meantime. But with test optional, here's the thing. I the frustrating part about test optional is that it puts the onus on the student, right? Because instead of just taking it and knowing they have to do their best, or just not having it and not having to worry about it at all, now the conversation becomes, is my score good enough? Is it good enough
Hmm.
to set, right? Which is its whole other kind of ball game. And the research does play out that students who do include a test score. Now, here's the thing: this isn't a direct uh, causation thing. So bear with me as I explain this. Uh, Students that do submit test scores do get in at higher rates. That's just
Hmm.
blanket across the board. Practically every school that's test optional. The catch, though, is that students who are submitting the scores are only submitting them if they're good. And if they're good, they've probably put in a lot of time to the rest of their application. So it's probably more correlation than it is causation. Like I wouldn't
Hmm.
say taking the test or submitting a score is an inherently like leg up, because especially if you don't have a great score, at least compared to that school's normal scoring averages, it probably wouldn't help you that much. But so the long story short of it is like, is it worth it to you? Because the way I explain it is a test score will never get you in. We have
Hmm.
so many perfect, like even in the last couple of years, I've had a handful of perfect score students that I've worked with myself, and they've been applying to some, hyper competitive universities, and they don't get into every single one. And these are valedictorians with perfect scores. But I remember hearing the statistic that if you took every single slot at like the Ivy Leagues, there are three valedictorians and like three perfect score students for every single slot. Like there's more of those in the country than there are even slots available. So um it's not a guarantee, but it's more, do you want to, like, how should I say this? Like, given all the variables and admissions, we can say you maximized this one if you do increase your score to a level that you are comfortable with. And so it's more, is that something that you want to just erase as a variable because you did get a solid score? Or do you
Hmm.
want to kind of leave it up to chance in that way? And that's the part that I think is unfair to students with test optional. Um, and so that's why I think going back to that very first thing we spoke about, getting a baseline score and just seeing if it's really worth it to you. Because even the highest scoring students rarely need, let's say, more than about 40 or 50 hours of tutoring over, let's say, like 3 or 6 months. So that's
Hmm.
usually like once or twice a week for, yeah, usually 3 months. Maybe you come back and take the test, you spend another 6 weeks. Maybe you want to get those last few points, you spend another like 3 or 4 weeks. That's the absolute maximum. And I say that because you see these companies out there pitching like, 250 hours, or, you know, these 6 day a week boot camps for 10 weeks in the summer. That's not the way these things work. Like again, it's so much more about form and function and consistency than it is about like how many reps you get in or how much heavy lifting you do. Um, and most students for us actually sign up. We do them in blocks of 12 hours because it just kind of fits, like an hour and a
Hmm.
half for 8 weeks or twice a week for 4 weeks. Um, Most start off with 12. Just get a baseline. Just go in and run the race, see how you feel. And if you need to come back, maybe you sign up for another 12 or 24. I mean, we have some students sign up for much more, but they're usually doing like AP or IB work on top of that.
Hmm.
They're using the tutor hours. But if nothing else, I would say start small.
Hmm.
There's no reason to dive in unless you have like some major need and you're like, I must have this sort of
I love it. I think it's such a refreshing way to look at it, and you're right. I think some of these things are, it's one of the very few like universally quantifiable items that you kind of have in the admissions
Mhm.
process. And so I totally get where you come from there. And I think also on your point on it being test optional, and if you have a strong score you submit, you're seeing the SAT and ACT averages slowly eke up on a lot of these schools, just like we saw the
Yeah.
GPAs eke up as sort of grade inflation became a thing in high school. And so it's
Hmm.
becoming arguably harder and harder to get a realistic baseline of sort of where you fall in the spectrum of kind of where these admissions criteria are. But to your point, if it's something that you can eliminate or at least try to eliminate as a factor,
Yeah.
it's certainly worth exploring in that sense. And now that we've determined that, hey, you don't have to be just like this baseline super smart kid, you can train for this thing. Like that to me, as somebody who grew up struggling with, let's say, for example, math, that is certainly not my strong suit. I would have taken a lot
Hmm.
of solace in knowing, oh, I can flex this muscle, I can train this muscle, and I can do it in a way that also would make me feel happy. I don't have to do a 6 day a week, 10-week boot camp
No.
to figure it out. I can take an appropriate amount of time to sort of build this up and go and yeah, I mean it's so interesting. We see it on the sports side too, right? I mean on baseball,
Hmm.
so many times, whether it's fair or not, I can watch kids that pitch that are amazing. They can throw 4 pitches for strikes. They can put it wherever they want. They can keep people, on their heels. They pitch for outs. But if they don't hit 90, there's just some
Right.
Division I schools that are just never even going to look at them. They're not even going to open the
Right.
door and see what that is. And so I think at least from my kids' standpoint, that's an easier thing to visualize from like there's just some arbitrary numbers that get put in place sometimes, and you can agree with them or
Yeah.
not agree with them, but we're not the ones making the rules. So we got to kind
Right.
of play within the confines of the game. So I think that's super kind of helpful to sort of visualize and see that or hear about that in context. Going completely kind of off in the other direction. So Rath tutoring,
Yeah.
do you want to highlight like obviously we're talking about test prep today. That's most of my kids and kind of where they're spending a lot of time. But you guys do testing across the board or tutoring across the
Mhm.
board. I'm
Oh yeah.
curious, what's your favorite thing to tutor somebody on?
Actually, my specialty, and this has been really since my first days as a tutor, it's always been the students who have plateaued with either other tutoring companies, almost like, back when like Shaq was playing basketball, he had like a free throw coach, specialist. And it's like, who's going to be like the guru around like getting Shaq over the hump? And I guess that's not the best example because he never got there. Um, but no, but truly, like for me, it's like when students, almost even if you compare it to like a medical diagnosis that no one else can figure out,
Mm,
it's like what's holding the student back? What's the deal? Because at least within the confines of the test, I can always figure it out. And
mm,
it takes a lot of like kind of openness and vulnerability, almost like reviewing film with a student. Um, and it's like, hey, well, why are you dipping your elbow before you shifted your weight? That
mm,
like little sort of thing if it was an athletic thing. Um, but that's more for me personally because it's fun being able to unlock that. It's
mm,
fun seeing really to go from a shift of typically it's not that students don't know something that's on the test, especially when they're scoring pretty highly. It's that they're not seeing what they need to see. And
mm,
so if you can, and the difference being is like when someone doesn't know something and they learn something brand new, it's a little bit more slow. They're kind of like, oh, okay, I'm kind of getting that. I'm starting to get that and understand it. But if they're not seeing it and you're like, oh, you just had to move this variable here. And they're like, oh, that's it? Are you kidding me? That's all it was? It was right there in front of me, almost like a Where's Waldo, like it just pops out at you.
yeah.
Um, and, being able to, just jump in without any sort of expectations and let the student share their experiences, their frustration, the parents kind of sharing their hopes and dreams and, where they want their kid to get in or like if they get actually one of my favorite students ever, uh, he was a volleyball player that ended up at University of Arizona. And this was over 10 years ago. I've been tutoring a long time. He had severe dyslexia. And so all he needed to get at the time was the NCAA minimum. So this
Mm,
is the complete opposite of like, I need to get like a 35 ACT or a 1460 SAT. He just needed the bare minimum. And it took months and it was hard work for everybody, but we got him there. And he ended up starting his freshman year, just having, a full 4 years starting there and stuff. And it was just an amazing experience. So just being able to unlock that possibility when someone thought I'm just not a test taker or I
mm,
can't figure this out. And I think also just spinning that and empowering them to realize it's literally not you. It is the test. It is the format. It is designed to prey on you and prey on how you're taught and make you think it's you. It's like a gaslighting sort of test, if you will. Um, and so yeah, I think yeah, for me personally, kind of, I mean, for lack of a better term, coming in and getting to be that hero, like getting to help get them over the hump, and who doesn't want that? Who doesn't enjoy that as an experience? Um, and yeah, I think at the very end of the day too, I can leave them with confidence that they've put in every effort. Like I even had
mm.
another student. He jumped from about a 29 ACT to a 35, and
Wow.
then he wanted finally he's like, I have to go back and take it one more time. I'm like, dude, no, you missed one problem. Like it was one, I promise, or it might have been two. It was very few at the time, but nevertheless, you know, it's like I like being able to share like or help them determine even if it's worth it for them or not. You
Mm.
know, like there's just certain situations where like, look, you're already under par. You don't need to like get the course record. You're fine. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, we've reached the appropriate pinnacle for what we're going
Yes.
for here, and kind of yeah. No, I get that entirely, and I empathize 100%. I mean, on my end, like when you find that right school that just clicks for a kid, or when you
Mm,
can hook them up with a, you know, they connect with a coach, and it's like lightning in a bottle when they go and visit. It makes sense. Like, yeah, of
yeah.
course. When we hang up from that Zoom call, I'm fist pumping the air. Like I'm pretty excited.
Yeah.
Like, heck
Yeah.
yeah, man. Like you got to be a part of that person's sort of growth and opportunities. So I totally
Exactly.
get that. I think it's such a fun way to sort of approach it. And that's probably why you get to be doing that for 20 years is you sort of that those are sort of those moments that kind of keep you coming for the next kid and the next kid and the next kid on that kind of stuff. So I
Oh, and even to your point, if I was just in it for the actual like content of the test, do you know how insanely boring it would be? Because if you think about it, like the tests have changed to an extent over the years, but whether it's academics, I mean, it's American high schools, it's pretty much the same content, and these tests have changed somewhat, but like it's pretty much the same stuff. So that's immensely boring. The fun part is getting to know each student's case, seeing what their path has been, seeing what holds them back. And at this point, it gets a little like eerie sometimes for me because a student will have missed a problem. And I'm like, you answered this because you thought that, right? And they're
mm,
like, how did you know? And it's because there's certain things that students fall into, but they're flipping out because it's almost like I'm reading their poker hand. They're like, how did you know
yeah.
what I had? I've seen this 50 times before. Uh, but it's just it is fun being able to share that and just help you know ease the process.
Mm, I love it. Yeah. And become a part-time magician and you're in
Yeah,
between. So that's kind of cool
yeah,
too.
exactly right.
Yeah, I dig it. Well, Eric, man, this has been super, super insightful and super, super fun to chat with you about this. The question I like to kind of ask everybody sort of on the tail end is like, you know this world, you've forgotten more about this stuff than I'll probably ever learn in my lifetime at this point.
Sure.
So is there a question that you wish I would have asked? Is there a point that you wish would have been brought up during this conversation? It can be your own soapbox. It can be something that you feel like we missed that was a pretty key piece for parents. Just kind of curious, is there any, just want to kind of give you this moment to sort of help me fill in the blanks on things that I'm not as educated on.
Yeah, no, great way to frame it. And I think it would be this is that there's a huge gap between like knowledge in general and performing in an academic system.
Hmm.
And I don't want students to get discouraged because the system is set up in a very particular way and
Hmm.
they don't think that they have capability. And so for me, it's more myself and my company focuses on helping students navigate that academic system. But every student has core knowledge, every student has core capability. And for really anything they'd encounter in pretty much high school and college with enough effort, they can figure it out. There are some harder subjects and some harder concepts. I mean, you get into some high level philosophy classes or some really high upper division chemistry in college, like it can get pretty heady. But from a baseline perspective, I'm dead set on backing up that everyone is capable, everyone has potential, and if you're feeling stuck, that's what we're here for. Call up Rath Tutoring, and not to just give it too much of a pitch, but it is what we do. Uh, we'll help you know where you stand and have a consultation on what it would look like to get to where you want to be, and all of that's always free of charge. Because we just want to make sure it's the right fit before a student invests the time, the energy, the money, everything. Um, and so don't let the system hold you back from achieving what you want to achieve. It's doable, can be frustrating, but it's doable.
I love it. Yeah, that's perfect bow tie. No notes on my end. Thank you so much, Eric. This has been an absolute blast, man.
Yeah,
I'm
thanks
sure
for
we'll
having
see
me.
each other. Yeah. I'm sure we'll see each other at a conference or something. But until then,
Yeah,
man,
definitely.
have a good one.
Perfect. Yeah, definitely. Thanks a bunch, Reed.